for 3 days, and all I have is a knife and a water filter. So, but it's so much stinking fun. Caught a hare for this group and provided dinner. It was fantastic. It was so good. They're like, who are you? You should be teaching this course. So it was just a ton of fun. And yeah, that was a good waste of time while I untied that knot. Thanks, Andrew. Appreciate that, buddy. Yeah, Discovery Channel. Absolutely. All right. So, hey, here's what I'm going to do for this session. This is kind of our last session together. I am going to spend a little bit of time talking about how assessments can help utilize discipleship and growth, how those assessments can help fuel those things, because we do have assessments that are available through Glue. And then I want to take like the last half hour just to do some Q&A, because I know that there's a lot of questions about like, hey, do you guys, integrate with Planning Center and all this sort of stuff. And I know this has been fire hose, and so thank you for sticking with me. It's a lot of information. I'm trying to present when we bring our churches to Boulder, Colorado, which is where our offices are, for Lighthouse Summits. We usually spend like 3 days going over this stuff, and we're trying to give it to you guys in just 3 sessions. So, assessments for growth and discipleship. Want to call back to the engagement life cycle, right? We talked about attract, get, keep, grow, multiply. How do they hear about us? Why do they come or not? Why do they stay or not? Why do they grow or not? Why do they multiply or not? As you can see, in between each of those is a gap. What happens in the gap is the important part. Andrew, can I get some water, please? I asked him for that like 10 minutes ago. But what happens in the gap is the important part. So if we're interested in the outcomes rather than just the activities, how do we measure those? Surveys and assessments are a great way to do that. Now, here's where we have to be careful. Assessment burnout is a real thing, right? But here's the great thing about where you guys are at, as opposed to some of these churches that have been established for a long time. You get to set the norm of these things, of what you will do as a church. And so a couple of the churches that we work with, they established and have worked to establish, hey, at the beginning of the year, we are going to take a spiritual assessment of our entire congregation. The first year, they got 30% participation. The next year, they got 60% participation. The next year, they got 70% participation. The next year, they got 80% participation. It wasn't until 5 years later that they got 90+% participation. Thank you, sir. Give Andrew a round of applause. He deserves it. What you guys get to do is say, this is going to be a part of who we are. And here's the best way to do that. Pastors always ask, well, how do I get my people to take an assessment? Ask them. And tell them why it's important to you. Because as the pastor, you are the vision carrier for your church. And when you make an ask, you know this, you protect your asks, right? Hey, pastor, can I get my Sunday or my Saturday morning women's knitting and cookie baking thing announced? Can you announce that for us? No. Well, why not? Don't you like us? I love you. I only have so many asks, though. This is one where you can say this is an important ask. So when you get up on stage and you say from the front, my heart is to pastor you. I love you. But I don't get to sit down to coffee with every single one of you. And I want to know you more. I want to know about you. I want to know what God's doing in your life. I want to know where you're struggling. And the best way for me to do that is for you to tell me. So as a church, I'm just asking you, we're going to do an assessment. And we're going to do it yearly, because I want to see if what we're doing as a church is moving that needle. And so I want to have metrics that I can compare year after year after year. So would you please just join me? Some churches do it right in their service. We had a church, Good Shepherd Church, out of Charlotte, North Carolina, United Methodist Church of about 1,500 people. They just started using this tool. The guy that there is brilliant. He found a tool that he can create all the answers and weight all the answers the way that he wants to. So at the end of it, it puts them into this funnel and they get the right resources for their area of spiritual growth. We don't have that yet as Glue, but you can, if you're brilliant like that, you can figure that sort of stuff. Their pastor asked that vision and said, hey, we're going to take 10 minutes in service. We're just going to play some music. We're not going to ask that you take out your phones right now. First time they've ever asked it to do that in church, right? And said, would you just take this assessment? They had 97% participation. You know what they did for the old folks who didn't have like a cell phone that could do that? They engaged their youth ministry and said, hey, we've got youth back there with iPads that'd be willing to come alongside and help you get into it, and then you can answer it yourself. If you don't feel comfortable with that, we do have a paper form. That was the manual work where they had to input somebody. They only had like maybe a dozen of those. Great way, great ask. So here's what assessments can do. This is a church from Hillside. This is a scorecard for their grow. They're the ones that I gave the example about the other day that said they were the ones who aligned their ministry and their missions and stuff to the Attract, Get, Keep, Grow, Multiply church engagement framework. So this is part of Barna's research, and we are partners with Barna. And so this is actually a flourishing one that you can take when you get access to Glue. You get access to these assessments and surveys. This is the human flourishing one. And so it is built around research done with Harvard, between Harvard and Barna, around the 5 elements of human flourishing: health, faith, finances, vocation, and relationship. So in this basic one, they can see that their finances and their faith, those are really, really high. One area where they can see that their people are struggling is in relationships. So this creates a baseline. It goes a little bit deeper. I know you won't be able to see this one or the next one here, but this shows you a little bit about the measurements of flourishing and thriving churches. There's the 5 areas of flourishing. This is the state of the church, Barna Glue partnership that we have. This is kind of what it looks like. And I know you guys can't see this one because it's a little bit smaller on the screen. But here is kind of a report out that you get for your church and faith engagement. You can see that 45% of their people are growing. That's the blue. The orange, 40% of their people are flourishing. And then the rest are either exploring, trusting, unwavering, or enduring. And then you can see how your congregation begins to answer questions like, over the last 2 months, how often have you participated in church activities, worship services, classes, events, groups, etc.? How long have you been attending this church? This is a built-in assessment that we have, but you can do these sorts of things on your own. You can start to ask questions of your people, even in simple text messaging campaigns. If you use something like Glue, it's super easy. If you already have a text messaging service, do something like this. Hey, text this QR code. It's going to lead you to like a Survey Monkey or whatever. The 2 things you always want to capture, because they're the 2 most important factors to cut data by, are generation and gender. What generations think about what's going on at your church and what the different genders. Because if I know that my men between the ages of 35 and 45 are really struggling in their marriages, now I have a direct pastorable moment that I see, hey, when I get the data back and I cut it by generation and gender, and I see that those men, how would you rate the satisfaction of your marriage? And they're all at like a 2 out of 5. There's something I can do. That's all about collecting that data from an assessment, right? Eaglebrook, 2020 Christmas cohort. They send the survey out to everybody in the service. They just asked a simple question. We'd like to track your response. How would you gauge your relationship with Jesus? A, I'm already following Jesus. B, I want to make a decision to follow Jesus. C, I have questions. Or D, I'm not interested. So what they did is they just broke that down. You can see 7,500 of their people said they're already following Jesus. And I realize these numbers are big, especially at church planting, right? But this is just who we work with most of the time in the Lighthouse group. So you can extrapolate this down to your, like, hey, we had 50, or, out of the 50 people that attend our church, we have 40 that are already following Jesus, 3 that want to make a decision, 3 that have more questions, and like 5 that aren't interested. That's still relevant, actionable data for you. And then at the end of the survey, you know what they did? If you have questions, may we contact you. If you're not interested, can we ask why? More actionable data for them to understand and know who it was their people. There's a really quick 3-question assessment that you can take back to your churches and get actionable data on right now. They revolve around marriage, faith, and finances. Those are kind of the big 3 in anybody in your church: marriage, faith, and finances. So question number 1, marriage. All in all, how satisfied are you with your marriage? 1, not applicable, I'm not married. 2, not at all satisfied. 3, not very satisfied, somewhat satisfied, very satisfied, or completely satisfied. Give me 1 second here. I'll go to the next one so you can read it on faith. Can't find my mic. I don't want to cough into the mic. Next question on faith. Which of the following best describes where you are in your spiritual life? And you can have all these. You don't need to give them all the answers. You can put a slide like this up on your screen on Sunday and just say, hey, text us the number. Now you have all of these numbers, and you can take that on the backside and go, okay, it correlates to this. So, out of the 100 people here, 90 answered that they were satisfied, but 5. And then at the end, hey, if you answered, 1 to any of these, would you tell us why? Now you're going to get some actionable data. Question 3 around finances. Which of the following best describes your current financial situation? I require financial assistance to get by, all the way up to I have more that I need for myself and my family. This comes around the 5 S's. This comes out of Thrivent's Wise with Money jersey. So or Wise with Money journey. If anybody is a Thrivent member, Thrivent does a phenomenal job, and we'll cover the 5 S's here in just a minute. We'll look at it. They have found, and this is some of the stuff that I started getting into yesterday, is that when you start to pastor people from a point of generosity rather than debt reduction, it completely changes the game. Look, we love Dave Ramsey. FPU has done some amazing things for family, getting them out of debt. But when you start talking about people being wise with their money and generous, it completely changes their mindset on how they spend their money. And so Thrivent's Wise with Money journey has been incredibly impactful and helpful. And I showed some of those pictures yesterday, and I'll do the same thing today. We'll get back into it. This is an assessment that we did with a church out in Gilbert, Arizona. They've got multiple campuses. So this is just one campus. They decided that they wanted to do a marriage class. But they wanted, going into the marriage class, know what areas of marriage they should really focus on. And they wanted to see if the marriage class would actually move the needle for the people who participated. So when people registered, they were asked to take this survey. You can see out of the 103 that started it, 97 completed it. So we had a 94% completion rate, which is really, really good. The info they got out of this: how satisfied are you with your relationship? And I just took some of the responses from this. 37, only 8% said they were completely satisfied. 37% said they were very satisfied. 29% they were only somewhat. 20 not very, and 6% not satisfied at all. They could look at the different averages, the different categories where they could see that people fell short. And so spiritual beliefs and commitment, those were the 2 highest. That makes sense because you're at a church, right? So you're asking your people in this church to take this class. Look, we believe in Jesus. We love Jesus. We're chasing after him, and we're committed to each other because that's what we said at our wedding vows. However, we're really struggling in areas of communication and conflict, closeness. These are our 3 lowest scores. So now the church went, okay, now we can talk about this. Now we know what to focus on as we go through this class. So they took the class. You can see where some of these numbers were. And this is actually from an actual assessment that's in Glue. It's called the Relationship Check-In. And you can see this is where they're low, right? They're down here at the 1s, all that sort of stuff. They asked the exact same couples to take it after the class was completed. Now, we only had 87 start it and 84 complete it because some people dropped out of the class. Some people weren't there to take it, whatever. Still 97 completion rate amongst the people that were there. Look at how the numbers changed because the church was able to focus. Oh, my bad. Remember, throw something at me. I'm not averse to it. Look at how the numbers changed. We went from 6% not at all satisfied, 20% only not very satisfied, only 29% only somewhat satisfied. I went backwards to this. 46% completely satisfied, 40% very satisfied, 7% somewhat satisfied, only 5% not very satisfied. And there's the one angry couple who is headed for that incredibly sad wall of divorce with 1% of not at all satisfied still. That's measurable. We talked about the right things and it made a difference. We moved the needle. Now we know as a church, when we talk about marriage in any of our series, we can come back to the idea of conflict and communication as keys. We can apply that to any sermon series. So you can take 45 seconds in the middle of a message and say, hey, couples, this is how this applies to you. When you're in the middle of conflict, it's often the person who takes the first step. That's the heart, right? Like you can apply that to any message. Even the book of Acts, where do we usually talk about marriage in the book of Acts? Ananias and Sapphira, and they both died for lying, right? Like that's usually the only place we cover marriage in the book of Acts. But we can talk about marriage in the book of Acts through the idea of conflict, through the idea of communication, through the idea of closeness with one another. You can apply that. So you don't have to wait until a marriage series comes up to talk about marriage because you know where they're struggling, which is a very cool thing. You can see the numbers, see where we were at. Their communication, their conflict, which were their lowest ones, are now some of the highest. So the church just focused on the right things. And that's exactly what we want assessments to do. They help us focus. They give us a measurable baseline. They tell us if we move the needle, and they give us the right areas of focus. They're super, super great at some of that sort of stuff. So this is the 5S spectrum that comes from Thrivent that I referenced. Everything from surviving, I require assistance, struggling, I'm kind of struggling to keep up, I'm stable, making ends meet, I'm secure, or I have a surplus. When you ask people how they're doing financially, and it falls into this category, guess what the people who realize that they have a surplus need to do? Give. Instead of going, hey, you're buried in debt. Let's get rid of that debt so you can start giving. Oh, all right, I gotta do envelopes and all this sort of stuff and cut up my cards and put them in the freezer and a block of ice and all this sort of stuff. And like, I got to do these weird things so that I can get out of that so I can start giving. That's what we call operating from a scarcity mindset. I don't have enough, but we know, you and I know as pastors that God proves himself faithful when we put him first. He's done it in my life when I was a pastor. He's done it in yours. We're asking our people to take that leap. Let's operate from a mindset of abundance rather than a mindset of scarcity and figure out where people are. And you know what you can do with the surviving and the struggling? Those are the people that need help. Hey, as a church, how can we come alongside you? You're going to have people in the church go, hey, I want to take care of somebody. Do you know anybody that needs their water bill paid? Yes, I do. Pretty incredible what assessments can do. Again, generosity. 80% of people who give to church have no credit card debt. People who attend more than 2 times a month give 1.8 times more than those who attend less frequently. Generosity is a key factor. This is the stat that I showed very briefly yesterday. I broke it again, Andrew. My fat thumb. There we go. When giving is viewed as a function of income, you can see that the giving actually goes down once people pass the $100,000 mark. The more money they get, the less they give. But as a function of the 5S spectrum, from surviving to struggling to surplus, generosity increases as the 5S level increases. So when they move from surviving to struggling and to surplus, because guess what happens to somebody who's surviving and struggling once they get to surplus? They remember where they were and where God has brought them, and it creates this cycle of giving and taking and giving back. Assessments can actually be used within your staff. Now, this falls a little bit from my Blue Bison stuff when I talk about staff. Each great leadership development church understands that apprenticing the right people in the context of ministry is far more important than sending them to a class, right? Apprenticing the right people in the context of ministry is far more important than sending them to a class. This is where the water comes in, crass. We can get that way if you want to, but I don't know if you'd like me. So this is just a great assessment that you can run for your people. How would you feel if you could no longer use this ministry? What type of people do you think would most benefit from this program, this ministry? What would it be? What's the main benefit you receive from blank? How can we improve blank for you? 5 very simple questions that will give you tons of actionable, or 4 simple questions that will get you tons of actionable feedback. 3 questions for personal performance goals of teams. This is how I would do reviews with people if I were adhering to the attract, get, keep, grow, multiply, the framework. I would ask my people, hey, where did you innovate this year in ministry? Tell me about how you thought creatively about ministry. What innovations did you lead with? When I was a student ministry in Arizona, I led something called Ministry on Zero. It was something that I wanted to try, something new. Basically, we gave our budget back to the church. You guys are all right. Okay, where can I find youth pastors like you? That's fantastic. Love it. I said, I want to give my budget back to the church. It wasn't huge. Youth ministry budgets never really are. And I said, I'm going to teach my students about giving. And so I had these pipes in the back, and I said, a pipeline is exactly what we talked about earlier. A pipeline moves resources from an area that's rich in them to an area that needs them. I said, we as a student ministry are going to use those pipelines to give what God's given us away. And I taught them about tithing for 5 weeks. And then I said, here's the deal. We've given our budget for the ministry back to the church. And we're going to ask you guys to contribute to the ministry if you believe in what God's doing here. So here's what we're going to do. We were transparent. We said, hey, here's the money and what it takes to do like the fun nights that we have, the events, the deposits that you got to leave, buses for camp. We would have Bibles to give away all the time. Here's what it costs us to give away Bibles every weekend. Here's what, all the ministry costs. I put them up there, everything for everybody to see. And I said, here's where we're at. We're asking you guys to help us meet those needs without skipping a beat. But I also want to model what we've been talking about for the last 5 weeks. So we are actually going to give 10% of what you guys give back to the main service. We're going to start tithing as a student ministry to our own church. And not only that, we are going to start giving away 20% of what God gives us to the places that we're involved in. So we were involved in a little village in Africa, Malawi, Africa, called Chikudzulire. And I said, we're going to give 20% back to Children of the Nations to help fund what they're doing in Chikudzulire. So we're actually going to operate off of 70% of what you guys give. Within the first month, we exceeded our budget. On middle school, there were about 100 middle schoolers at that time, about 250 high school, and about 50 college students. We exceeded our budget. By Christmas, we started this at the beginning of the school year. By Christmas, we took special offerings to build a water well and give every person in Chikudzulire mosquito nets. And we were still $2,000 over budget, and we did both those things. By the time I left that church, we had a $10,000 surplus in our budget. We had built 3 water wells, provided mosquito nets for every person in Chikudzulire, as well as another village that they said needed mosquito nets. And the ministry was buzzing along. We took more kids to camp. We had more kids coming. We gave away more Bibles, and it was all on the backs of the students giving. We also, by the time I left, we're giving 15% back to the church and giving away 30% of what the kids gave in. So we were operating on almost 50% of what they gave as a ministry. Because we were transparent, because we knew we operated from a place of generosity, we modeled it, And then we asked kids, what's your favorite thing about this? This is where the assessment part came in. What's your favorite thing about student ministries? I know that being a part of Burn Student Ministries, I'm a part of something bigger. That was huge. That was a huge insight for us, and we were able to keep it up. So when I ask, hey, how did you innovate? I want to hear stories like that. What did you learn? What programs, what apps did you fire, and what did you hire to solve for one of those jobs? And then the third question I was asking is, who are you developing? That's what I want my staff to be doing. I want them to be innovating. I want them to be learning, and I want them to be developing somebody else. That's my leadership pipeline. So these are the three questions that I would ask.